November 7, 1944, 3rd Armored Division Maintenance Depot, Stolberg, Germany. A disabled Sherman sat with its transmission torn apart, officially declared a total mechanical loss. M4A3, serial number 3518724, had thrown its final drive for the third time in 2 months, a failure that haunted Shermans in the brutal German winter. Most mechanics would have signed the paperwork and walked away. Technical Sergeant Curtis Lee Hammond did not. He stood before the wreck with that look his men knew meant trouble. Hammond was 32, a one-time Moonshine Runner from East Tennessee who'd learned more about engines from federal agents than any manual could teach. "He's going to do something crazy again," Private James Murphy whispered to Corporal David Chen. Last month, Hammond had converted 3 half-tracks to run on captured German fuel. Now he turned to his crew with a grin. "Gentlemen," he drawled, "this tank's about to become the fastest Sherman in Europe. I'm going to make her outrun a Jeep." Silence, then nervous laughter. Shermans weighed 33 tons and barely managed 26 miles per hour. Jeeps hit 65. What Hammond proposed sounded impossible. "Sergeant, that's mechanically impossible," Chen said. "The powertrain can't handle it. You'd be court-martialed," someone muttered. Hammond's grin widened. "Maybe, but this tank's already scrap. We're losing more tanks to breakdowns than enemy fire, and I know things about this Continental R975 Detroit never figured out." He claimed there was 200 extra horsepower hiding in the engine. Nobody knew that Hammond, through months of unauthorized tinkering, had discovered the Sherman's powertrain ran well below its theoretical limits. The R975 was rated at 400 horsepower for durability, but Hammond, who spent his youth squeezing ridiculous power from moonshine running engines, knew reliability often meant wasted potential. Hammond's path from moonshiner to Army mechanic began in March 1942. Arrested for the 14th time, a judge gave him a choice: 5 years in prison or enlistment. He chose the Army. Basic training at Fort Knox revealed an uncanny mechanical instinct. Hammond could diagnose engines by sound. Instructors admired his talent and were alarmed by his disdain for procedure. He didn't follow manuals because, as he said, they were written by people who'd never had to keep an engine running while revenuers were shooting at you. By September 1943, he was a technical sergeant despite 17 reprimands for unauthorized mods and 43 for insubordination. Yet 3 battalion commanders had commended him for keeping units running through unorthodox fixes. The Normandy campaign taught him a harsh lesson. The 3rd Armored landed at Omaha Beach on June 23, 1944. The real enemy wasn't only German guns, it was mechanical failure. Shermans broke down constantly. For every tank destroyed by enemy action, 2 more were sidelined by mechanical problems. Hammond stopped wasting time following procedure and focused on keeping tanks moving. If parts weren't available, he fabricated them. If manuals said a repair couldn't be done, he did it anyway. Most controversially, he began tuning engines for more power. Studying the Continental R975, he realized it was essentially the same design as aircraft engines pushing 500-plus horsepower. The difference was tuning, not engineering. In secret, late-night experiments on written-off tanks proved his theory. A Sherman that normally topped 26 mph suddenly hit 32. Acceleration improved noticeably. Captain Robert Morrison confronted him in September 1944. "Sergeant Hammond, your unauthorized modifications violate regulations. They void warranties and may compromise reliability." Hammond was calm. "Sir, them warranties don't mean much when we're losing tanks to breakdowns. I ain't compromising reliability. I'm improving it. The engines are detuned so far below capacity they're actually less reliable," he added. Morrison hesitated. Hammond's modified tanks ran better without failing more often. "I can't officially authorize it," Morrison said finally, "but I won't stop you as long as it works. If Division finds out, you'll face court-martial. Clear?" Crystal clear, sir, Hammond replied. By November 1944, Hammond planned something beyond his prior experiments. Over 6 weeks, working nights, he rebuilt serial number 3518724 from top to bottom. He raised the compression ratio from 6.7 to 8.5 by machining the cylinder heads, reworked the carburetor using jets scavenged from a captured German aircraft, and advanced the ignition timing by 8 degrees. Most daringly, he modified the supercharger, boosting pressure by 20%. To handle the extra power, he reinforced the transmission with steel salvaged from a destroyed Panther. He changed gear ratios for higher speeds, strengthened final drives with extra plating, fitted heavier springs from M10 tank destroyers, and modified the shock absorbers. By December 20th, the Sherman was ready. The first test run came at 0200 on December 21st. Hammond's volunteers, Murphy as driver, Chen assistant driver, Jackson gunner, Foster loader with Hammond commanding. The Continental started with a deeper, meaner rumble. Murphy engaged the transmission and accelerated. At 20 mph, they were already beyond normal Sherman performance. At 25, they passed the official maximum. Murphy grinned. "Sergeant, she's still pulling strong." "Keep accelerating," Hammond ordered. At 35, Murphy's grin turned to astonishment. At 40, they'd entered Jeep territory. At 45, Chen warned, "Sergeant, engine temp's up but acceptable. Oil pressure's good." "This engine's happy." At 47 mph, they passed the timing marker and Murphy braked. The crew sat stunned, then laughed. "We just did 47 in a Sherman," Murphy said. Hammond inspected everything. Track tension, suspension, engine, all normal. He'd built a Sherman that could outrun a Jeep. 3 days later, serial number 3518724, nicknamed Moonshine Runner, joined Divisional Reserve. The Battle of the Bulge had erupted on December 16th. Every usable tank was needed. Morrison confronted Hammond again. "Sergeant, Division demands every operational tank. That's your modified tank, isn't it?" "Yes, sir." "If this fails in combat, I'll see you in Leavenworth. But if it saves lives, I'll recommend you for a medal." The tank went to war. If you're enjoying this tale of unauthorized innovation, please subscribe. We bring untold Y2 stories that show how individual creativity changed outcomes. Hit subscribe for more deep dives every week. Hammond assembled his crew. Murphy stayed as driver, Chen as assistant, veterans Johnson as gunner, and O'Brien as loader. Christmas Eve was spent preparing Moonshine Runner, 97 rounds of 75mm ammunition, thousands of machine gun rounds, full fuel tanks, and system checks. By midnight, they were combat ready. On Christmas morning, the 3rd Armored moved south. The weather was bitter, below 20 degrees. The column crawled on icy roads. On December 27th, near Hotton, Belgium, Moonshine Runner's moment came. A German Kampfgruppe had punched through American lines, threatening to cut off 2 infantry regiments. Moonshine Runner was among 16 tanks ordered to intercept. Intelligence reported at least 12 Panthers, self-propelled guns, and motorized infantry. Outnumbered and outgunned, Panthers had superior armor, guns, and optics. The Americans set an ambush. Moonshine Runner took an extreme flank. Hammond had requested that. His plan depended on mobility. At 1400 hours, the Germans appeared at 800 yards. 16 Shermans opened fire. A lead Panther took 3 hits and stopped. A second Panther's 88 spoke once. An American Sherman exploded. Within minutes, 4 American tanks burned, and 2 Panthers were disabled. The fight was going badly. The Americans were engaged on German terms. Hammond assessed quickly. "We need a different approach." He spoke into the intercom. "Murphy, remember how fast this girl moves?" "How could I forget, Sergeant?" "We're flanking the whole position at full speed. This is going to get interesting." Murphy didn't hesitate. He buried the accelerator. Moonshine Runner leaped forward. The modified engine roared. The 33-ton tank accelerated with startling speed. German commanders saw a lone Sherman charging and assumed suicide. Several Panthers traversed their turrets to track it, but the Sherman's speed was wrong for their gunnery. At 30 mph, Moonshine Runner moved faster than Panthers could effectively track. German gunners found shots were missing as their target crossed traverse limits. At 35 mph, the Sherman was a blur, racing across the flank at a speed no tracked vehicle its size should. Hammond's tactic was simple. The fastest vehicle usually wins. He avoided slugging it out at medium range and used speed to get behind the Germans, where Panther armor was weakest. In 90 seconds, Moonshine Runner covered 200 yards, circled the German positions, and appeared behind the column where rear armor was thin. "Halt!" Hammond ordered. "Gunner! 3 Panthers! Rear aspect, 400 to 600 yards! Make every shot count!" Johnson, the veteran gunner, moved the turret smoothly, locked onto the nearest Panther, and fired. The armor-piercing round slammed into the engine deck, cutting through the thin rear armor. The German tank stopped dead, its crew scrambling to escape. Johnson shifted aim to the second target, fired. Another hit, another penetration. That Panther erupted in flames, its turret lifting off. The third Panther tried to traverse, but Johnson was faster. Another kill. In just 30 seconds, Moonshine Runner destroyed 3 Panthers. The psychological effect was devastating. The Germans, suddenly under fire from an impossible position, from a tank appearing in their rear, lost all cohesion. Their advance stalled, then reversed. The American tanks seized the advantage. The battle raged for 20 more minutes. 8 Panthers were destroyed. Moonshine Runner accounted for 3 of them, and 4 more were disabled. American losses totaled 6 Shermans. Hammond assessed Moonshine Runner's condition. The violent maneuvers had pushed it to the limit, but the modifications held strong. Engine temperature was high but acceptable. Oil pressure, steady. Transmission, flawless. The tank had done the impossible and survived. Word spread fast. By evening, Hammond was summoned to division headquarters. He expected a court-martial. Instead, Brigadier General Doyle Hickey reviewed the after-action reports. "Sergeant Hammond," Hickey began, "commanders say your Sherman moved at impossible speeds. German prisoners insist they faced a new super tank. I'm also told you made unauthorized modifications. Explain." Hammond answered honestly. "Sir, I improved performance through modifications to compression, fuel delivery, supercharger boost, and ignition timing. I reinforced the transmission too. But everything works." "How much faster?" "Standard Shermans top out at 26 miles per hour, sir. Mine hit 45 to 48. They accelerate quicker, climb better, and hold speed on rough terrain. Modifications cost $72 per tank and take 4 days to install." "And reliability?" "They're more reliable, sir. The Continental Engine S, overbuilt for 400 horsepower. It runs better, producing 450 to 500. These engines last longer when pushed to their proper limits." Hickey thought for a moment, then made his decision. "Officially, I know nothing. Officially, you'll face court-martial if this fails. Unofficially, train our mechanics in your methods. We'll modify 20 tanks as a test. Captain Morrison will supply your resources. Questions?" Hammond nodded. "What do I call this, sir?" Hickey smiled. "Tank Performance Enhancement Program." Over the next 6 weeks, Hammond trained 8 mechanics, hands-on, personally supervising every step. Every modification was precisely documented. Engine removal, cylinder head machining, carburetor tuning, ignition advancement, supercharger adjustments, transmission reinforcement, final drive strengthening, suspension upgrades. By mid-February 1945, 20 modified Shermans were completed and distributed across the 3rd Armored Division. Hammond rode along on several missions to monitor their performance. The results were unanimous. Drivers loved the acceleration and speed. Commanders praised the newfound tactical flexibility. The modified tanks excelled in rapid response, flanking maneuvers and escaping bad engagements. Reliability matched Hammond's promise. The upgraded tanks averaged 1,500 miles between failures, on par with standard Shermans. And the cost benefit was undeniable. $72 and 4 days' work for 35% better mobility. Hammond's improvements turned into a real battlefield advantage. Requests for modification poured in from other units. But Hammond realized something. His methods required skilled mechanics who truly understood the work. Inexperienced attempts led to failure. In March 1945, Hammond was summoned to Army Ground Forces headquarters in Paris. 2 colonels, a brigadier general, and 3 Ordnance Department engineers attended. Confidently, Hammond presented his findings, his theories, combat data from 43 missions, and every technical detail. The ordnance engineers remained skeptical. "The Continental can't safely produce that much power," one insisted. "With respect, gentlemen," Hammond replied, "I'm not claiming it can. I'm showing you data from 3 months of combat. You're telling me what the engine can't do. I'm showing you what it already has done. There's a difference between theory and reality." Brigadier General Thomas Roderick stepped in. "The sergeant has a point. We can argue theory all day, but he's got proof from the field. I propose official tests at Aberdeen Proving Ground. If his modifications perform as claimed, we implement them. If not, we shut it down." 2 weeks later at Aberdeen, testers put a modified Sherman through exhaustive trials. 3 full days of measurements and analysis. The results vindicated Hammond completely. Top speed, 46.2 km/h. Acceleration, 0 to 30 in 23 seconds, compared to 41 for standard Shermans. Hill climbing, improved by 37%. Endurance, 500 miles without failure. The official test report, dated April 9, 1945, concluded that Hammond's modifications provided significant combat enhancement at minimal cost and acceptable reliability. It recommended immediate adoption across Europe. Authorization came April 15th from Supreme Headquarters. All maintenance companies were cleared to perform Hammond's upgrades, officially titled the Enhanced Mobility Program, though tankers called them Hammond tanks or Moonshine specials. By May 8th, the day Germany surrendered, over 300 Shermans had been modified. Units with the upgrades reported 23% fewer losses. The modified Shermans averaged 1.7 kills per engagement, compared to 1.1 for standard tanks. Before we continue with Hammond's legacy, if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that button now. Stories like this, of American ingenuity and determination, deserve to be told and remembered. Join our community and keep these stories alive. After the war, Army studies confirmed that Hammond-S modifications embodied exactly the kind of battlefield innovation the military should encourage. Continental Motors sent engineers to interview him, embarrassed that a self-taught mechanic had found performance potential they overlooked. Several of his ideas were later built into post-war engine designs. The company offered him a consulting role. He declined. "I've had enough of engines," he said. Technical Sergeant Curtis Hammond received the Bronze Star in May 1945. The citation mentioned his innovations, but left out the unauthorized part. Promoted to Master Sergeant, he was discharged in November 1945 and returned to Tennessee. He never went back to moonshining. Instead, he opened a small garage in Gatlinburg, specializing in engine rebuilding and performance tuning. He lived quietly, rarely speaking about his wartime service. He married in 1947, raised 3 children, and worked until his retirement in 1979. In 1983, military historian Dr. Robert Zaloga discovered Hammond's story, obtained declassified records, contacted him, and documented his work. Zaloga's book devoted an entire chapter to Hammond's achievements. Hammond attended a 3rd Armored Reunion in 1985, his first contact with comrades in 40 years. Dozens of tankers thanked him personally, crediting his modifications for their survival. One former commander told him, "Your upgrade saved my crew twice, once outrunning 3 Panthers, once reaching a bridge before the Germans blew it." His technical legacy went far beyond World War II. Field modification based on combat experience became standard doctrine. Later tanks were designed with greater power margins. Hammond's philosophy, test it, modify it, ignore the rules if they don't work, became a core part of American military innovation. Curtis Hammond died on March 17, 1992, at age 79. His obituary mentioned his service, but few details. Yet at his small private funeral, over 50 aging veterans gathered, tankers who'd traveled from across the country. One frail man approached Hammond's widow. "Ma'am," he said softly, "your husband saved my life. I was 19, driving a Sherman, terrified because the German tanks were better. Then I got one of Curtis's modified tanks. The first time I felt how fast she moved, I knew I had a chance. That speed saved me 3 times. I got to come home, have kids and grandkids, because Curtis figured out how to make a tank faster." His widow was moved to tears. These stories revealed a side of her husband she'd never fully known. The quiet mechanic had changed armored warfare and saved hundreds of lives. In 2003, the National World War II Museum acquired one of the few surviving Hammond-modified Shermans. Curators restored it to running condition, preserving every modification. In 2004, during a public demonstration, when the modified engine roared and the tank accelerated at unbelievable speed, the old veterans smiled and some wept. They were watching history come alive again. The museum display includes documents, drawings, photos, and testimonies. A placard reads, "Technical Sergeant Curtis Hammond increased Sherman speed by over 70% while maintaining reliability through unauthorized experimentation and unshakable determination. His work exemplifies American field innovation and the truth that the best solutions often come from those closest to the problem." Hammond's story raises timeless questions about innovation, authority, and expertise. He had no engineering degree, no credentials, no official backing, just deep practical knowledge, fearless experimentation, and absolute trust in his own results. His moonshining background was the perfect training, maximizing performance with limited tools and believing in your work even when the experts said you were wrong. His journey shows the tension between regulation and innovation. Rules existed for good reason, but rigid rules can stifle progress. The Army's response evolved perfectly, skeptical at first but ultimately supportive. That adaptability reflected the very best of American military culture. Every tanker who survived because his tank accelerated faster, every crew that escaped a Panther's fire, every soldier who made it home because of Hammond's work, they were the true measure of his success. The Bronze Star, the book, the museum tank, all fitting, but secondary. The real legacy was written in lives saved and families spared grief. The mad mechanic who made Sherman's Outrun Jeeps proved that true expertise can come from anywhere, and that real innovation often begins by questioning the impossible. When skill, courage, and results align, they can change the world. Curtis Hammond took wrecked tanks, broken engines, and impossible odds, and turned them into weapons that helped win a war. He did it with a moonshiner's ingenuity, a mechanic's intuition, and the conviction that rules are just suggestions when lives are at stake. The Continental engines in those modified Shermans, pushed far beyond their rated limits by a self-taught Tennessee mechanic, roared across Europe in 1945. They moved at speeds engineers never imagined, with reliability experts never believed possible. They roared because Curtis Hammond understood something no textbook could teach. Every engine hides untapped potential. Conservative limits are only the beginning. And sometimes, when everyone says something is impossible, it just means no one's tried hard enough. The fastest Sherman of World War II, the tank that outran a Jeep, the Moonshine Special that rewrote armored warfare, started as a wreck and a wild idea from a mechanic everyone thought was crazy. And sometimes the only way to solve the impossible is to ignore the doubters and build the solution yourself. One wrecked tank, one stubborn mechanic, and 47 miles per hour that changed history. That is the legacy of Technical Sergeant Curtis Lee Hammond. The moonshiner from Tennessee who hot-rodded his way into military legend, saving hundreds of lives by refusing to accept good enough. In a war won by industrial might, sometimes the decisive edge didn't come from Detroit's factories, but from a dusty maintenance tent in Germany where a mad mechanic looked at a broken tank and saw not what it was, but what it could become.